I want to find that on here in YouTube Studio.
Objective should be about saving lives around the world, and I think had sort of countries been more collaborative in funding COVAX properly, humanity as a whole would have suffered fewer deaths.
But when politicians have got to balance public health with also keeping an economy going, it's pretty naive, isn't it, to think that any government is going to very willingly give away vaccines to other countries before it's dealt with its own population.
Well, I think one looks at a sort of objective need, and I think clearly that there is a drive across the world to protect health workers and elderly people, those with the greatest need. But it shouldn't be the case that we are vaccinating sort of teenagers here in the UK so they can go on holiday, whilst health workers are dying in Kenya. This is morally obscene.
How important is it for the government here then for this vaccine rollout to be so successful, given that there are still a lot of criticisms of the way the pandemic was dealt with this time last year?
Well, yes, and you're absolutely right. These things are highly political, and you can see there's a real attempt, for us to do extremely well on vaccines and say that we really sort of conquered COVID, and perhaps gloss over some of the problems at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, this time last year, don't forget, a number of our neighbours were sort of locking down much faster than us, and we had a much worse time, particularly in the first wave. So I think there is a sort of a case of some leaders hoping that with a very successful vaccine rollout that we can sort of forget what happened before, but we must look at things in its totality right from the beginning of the pandemic.
You mentioned that you've had your first dose of the vaccine today. Just tell us briefly about your experience, because we hear so many compliments paid to the vaccinators and how it's organised.
Yes, it was absolutely fantastic. And I mean, it was the NHS at its best. And I would personally like to thank all the staff at the Junction Health Centre in Clapham Junction for basically sort of potentially saving my life today. And then, that's a truly wonderful thing. And I think the fact that there were all races there, classes of people there, it really did show the amazing solidarity of our publicly financed NHS, which is performing extremely well. And I think it's a sort of a beacon for the rest of the world. So 3 cheers for the NHS. They're doing a fabulous job.
Robert Yates from the think tank Chatham House. Let's go back to the news. Harry Walker has died at the age of 97. We can speak to Jenny Gow, who's the BBC's Formula One reporter. He was such a recognisable, whenever you heard him, Jenny. You met him. Was he the same off air as on?
Maybe not quite as excitable off air. He was a real gentleman. I was delighted to have been able to meet him just a little bit. I remember going to his house actually to interview him for the first time. I walked in, he was very kind, welcomed me into his home, offered me a cup of tea and actually used my name. And at that stage I was like, hang on a minute, Murray Walker knows who I am. This is mind-blowing. It was a really genuinely incredible moment for me.
He was pro-graphs, but he must have amassed an extraordinary amount been doing the job for a long time.
Yeah, it was almost as if he was born to be a commentator, even though it wasn't the first or even his second career. He was a tank regiment in World War II. Then he went on to have a pretty successful advertising career. And only after that did he go full-time into commentary. And it started with two wheels. He was into motorbikes. His father was a TT rider in the Isle of Man. And then made the transfer across to four wheels, and he knew everything. He knew everyone as well, and his relationship, I think, with some of the drivers was what made him so special and made, I suppose, his commentary so real.
Yeah, and he did show his preferences for some drivers or others, particularly if he was friends with them, and that just endeared him all the more to people.
Yeah, so you only have to think back to Japan 1996, I think it was, with the famous commentary line where Murray Walker was talking about Damon Hill, and he said, I have to stop, I've got a lump in my throat, and you could hear the emotion bubbling through his voice. He really did have a gift, and everybody in motorsport has been hugely touched and saddened by his passing. And you only have to look at the people, the amounts of people who were from fans to the most senior people in motorsport, like Jean Todt, the president of the FIA, who are pouring out their grief tonight because, yes, he was 97, but he was an incredible man, an incredible influence within motorsport.
Jenny, thank you very much. Jenny Gow. In Myanmar, at least 8 protesters have been killed by security forces as demonstrations continue across the country against last month's military coup. There's increasing international criticism of the tactics used against the protesters. The worst of the violence took place in the city of Mandalay, where police opened fire on the crowds. Jonathan Head reports.
The days in Myanmar's towns and cities are punctuated by protests, by lethal volleys of gunfire from the army and police, and by the funerals of those who've been killed. The death toll in this elemental battle between unarmed people and the military regime, whose authority they still refuse to accept, keeps climbing. Today was another terrible day in Mandalay, where opposition to the military coup runs very high.
The police started, they showed up at 10 a.m. By then the rally was already over, as I said. They were there to kill. They didn't have to kill, they didn't have to shoot a single shot. People were about to go.
Sorry guys, I can't come to lunch. I blew all my money on this gaming ring.
But they did anyway.
Welcome to Tech Wolf. In this video I'm going to show you how you can find and how you can get your stream key on YouTube mobile or on your mobile phone on YouTube, guys. As you know, you have this application here, but in this YouTube application there is no stream key. You can't really find it, at least I don't know any way how you can find it there. But you have an option to do it by going into internet. Open your browser, type in YouTube and here click into this web application. When it opens up, just make it a little bit bigger, guys, and scroll to the right top corner, and here you will see your icon. Click on your icon and here you will see to the right from your icon YouTube Studio. Just click into YouTube Studio.
Jonathan Head, BBC News, Bangkok.
Let's return to our main story this evening, the response across the country to the death of Sarah Everard. This was the scene at Clapham Common a little earlier, where hundreds of people gathered despite the official vigil being cancelled because of coronavirus restrictions. Police are in attendance and there have been some scuffles as they attempt to shut down the unauthorised demonstration. Protesters, mainly women, chanted "Shame on you" as officers attempted to stop speeches at the bandstand. Many people are lighting candles on their doorstep in memory of Sarah, including the Prime Minister and Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Well, our political correspondent Nick Eardley is here. Many people heeding the request by police, Nick, to leave Clapham Common because of safety concerns. But the government now under pressure to address the issue of male violence against women. What is the Home Secretary saying?
They are, and I think we'll hear a lot more about that in the next few days. Opposition parties, particularly Labour, have been calling for much tougher action. One of the things that the government has said already is that it's reopening up.
Opens up, just make it a little bit bigger, guys, and scroll to the right top.
Of violence against women should be dealt with. The government was already looking into this, but a consultation had ended. It was reopened yesterday, and the Home Secretary Priti Patel saying tonight that within 24 hours they'd had an extra 20,000 responses, a response that Ms Patel said was unprecedented. It's something that they're going to be looking at a lot more in the next few days. But I do think the government is under quite significant pressure now to come up with some answers on this and to potentially look a bit further into what can be done.
And this movement, Reclaim These Streets, which has grown up in a very, very short period of time, raised hundreds of thousands of pounds already in the space of a day for women's charities. They're going to be the ones who, according to what they're saying, that they're going to be keeping the government focused on this when it's so easy to see these campaigns, flare up and then fall away.
I think that's right, and I think the government is feeling some of the pressure on this. I suppose the question is how quickly you can come up with legislative change with actual meaningful ideas, and the government would answer that it is looking into it and that it will bring forward some proposals. But I would expect to hear more tomorrow from the Labour Party about some specifics that they want to see. There is some legislation going through Parliament next week, actually, which they are hoping can be amended to include some changes. I'd expect to see some more details of that over the next few days as well.
This comes at a time when money is, according to the government, in short supply. We've got a pandemic to pay for, but we know that over the years, things like refuges for women fleeing domestic abuse have closed because of the lack of funding. So that's going to be come under the spotlight again too.
Absolutely, and the question of funding, I think, is going to be a big one in the next few days. It's one that's changed over the last few months, hasn't it? We know that the government is prepared to spend huge amounts of money during the COVID crisis, and I think that some of those cuts that we've seen in the last few months and years will come under increased scrutiny. The message that's coming from the Prime Minister is that he is in listening mode and he wants to ensure that more is done to make sure that the women and girls feel safe. The criticism we always get when politicians come out with messages like that, is what are the specifics? What are you actually going to do about it? And that's one that we heard yesterday, for example, when the Home Secretary said that they were going to reopen this call for evidence. The government would say this is a first step to tackling this issue, but I suspect that the outpouring that we've seen from the public and from politicians in the last few days means that this time there's going to be really intense pressure on the government, not just to come up with some listening exercises, but to come up with some specific answers as well.
Yeah, not just how to keep women safe, but how to stop men being violent against them. Nick, thank you very much. Time for a look at the weather with Thomas.
Well, we've still got some big shower clouds lurking out there. It's been a blustery day with hail and thunder in places. There's rain in the forecast for tomorrow, but the chances are that the morning's actually going to be quite sunny, perhaps even gloriously sunny for some of us. So through this evening, scattered showers across the country, still a good breeze out there, but I think second half of the night it is going to turn clear, the winds will fall light and it will be quite nippy. In fact, early in the morning it'll be close to freezing in Newcastle and Hull, and for most of us around 4 or 5 degrees. So lots of fine weather in the morning, lighter winds, but a weather front is approaching, and we are in fact expecting rain second half of the morning, at least in Northern Ireland, and then by around lunchtime approaching many western parts of the UK. Now eastern Scotland should have a decent day, and maybe the extreme southeast, but the afternoon overall for the bulk of the country is looking pretty wet again.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Martine Proxall. The headlines. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he and his partner will light a candle this evening for Sarah Everard after an official vigil in South London was cancelled. Despite this, hundreds of people have gathered at Clapham Common to raise the issue of women's safety. Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Cousins has appeared in court after being charged with Sarah Everard's kidnap and murder. Former Formula One commentator Murray Walker has died. He was 97. He was appointed an OBE in 1996 for his services to broadcasting and motor racing. Now BBC News, Felicity Baker, who has a stammer, reveals what it's like to live with the condition.
Okay. I've worked for BBC News for 10 years as a producer, always behind the scenes, finding guests, setting up stories. I wondered if you had someone that might be available for an interview. But recently, during a chance conversation with the presenter Sophie Rayworth, I revealed my secret. I have a stammer.
Hello, I'm calling from the BBC.
I've spent my whole life trying to hide it. Now I'm discovering that I'm not alone. And I'm not the only one who struggles to say my name.
And I know you can say your name. Will you say it?
I know you can say your
I can't, I have to breathe.
There's the rugby player who says his violence on the pitch was driven by his stammer.
The self-loathing, I hated myself. I hated myself because I wasn't like other people.
The young man who was bullied at school but found an escape in music.
I'm gonna rap because I can't talk.
I just think, little do you know.
The art student who refuses to be underestimated.
Oh, I'm not dumb. Trust me, I just can't say it.
Because people can interrupt you without not even knowing.
The parents watching their son grow up with a stammer.
It's heartbreaking, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm in many tears.
Oh, come on! Sorry, I'm sorry.
The film star whose father stammered.
I would bring friends home from school who didn't know that my father stammered, and I got a bit embarrassed about that.
The president who stammers and knows just how it feels.
It drags you down in that empty hole in your chest. That feeling of panic you get and then anger.
Stammering is something I think about every single day, but no one ever talks about it. So now I'm stepping out in front of the camera to put stammering in a spotlight.
say it. I mean, like, I'm definitely worried about going into a job interview and just kind of making a fool of myself, but just not being able to like answer any of the questions that they like give me. Like, that's one of my fears in life.
I get so anxious if I'm put in a situation where I feel like someone's going to say to me, "What's your name?" Or you have to make a phone call and say, "Introduce yourself."
Whenever I meet someone new, I will either just like say, hey, my name's Grace, just like there, just to make sure that like I don't have to have that moment of like and me like being like, what's your name, or like me just being like, it's and just like not being able to say it.
I know just how she feels.
Looking for the best.
This was me 10 years ago.
Could you really please listen to Baker? I work for the BBC. So what brought you here?
Around 1.5 million adults stammer in